Welcome to Engineering Influence, a podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. And today we're putting a spotlight on the ACEC Research Institute. And a research project just recently came out, first of its kind. It's the first time that we've actually taken a look at the engineering industry and produced a diversity roadmap, kind of a gauge about where industry is, where member firms are right now on their DEIB programs and really where they aspire to go. And it's the first time we've actually taken a measurement of that. And to start the conversation, I'm very pleased to be joined by a few individuals who are engaged in this project. First, Chad Galentes. He is the CEO of Zwei Group. He is joined by Stephen Lucy. He is the president and CEO of JQ Engineering. And of course, everybody knows Joe Bates with the ACEC Research Institute. Chad, I'm going to put it over to you first. Where does the Zwei Group come in, and where does JQ Engineering come in the whole project? Give us kind of an overview and introduction on how everything kind of came together to produce this document, the source of its kind diversity roadmap.
Sure. Thank you very much, Jeff. So it really goes back 5 years ago when we were at Zwei Group going through our ownership and leadership succession, transitioning from Mark Zweig to me. And it was when we were rolling out a new mission, and that is to elevate the industry. And at that time, I sought out about 5 different diverse industry leaders to really just help me workshop this idea, this what I call a big idea of elevating the industry. And Steve Lucy was one of those who was generous to give me some of his time and insights into what elevate the industry means to him. And in his career, both of us are civil engineers, and we share that commonality. And really at the heart of Zwei Group's Elevate the Industry mission, it really is a recruiting and retention mission. Really about attracting and retaining professionals in this industry, which, as anybody that's listening to this podcast probably can relate, recruiting and retention is the greatest, and I call it a crisis that we're facing in the industry. And out of that mission, about a year later, is when our Elevate Her program was launched. And it was one of those, I would say, byproducts of the Elevate the Industry mission. And it was a very exciting program that I felt really captured the essence of what we were trying to do. And the Elevate Her program is also a recruiting and retention mission-oriented program, but really with the focus of those groups that are underrepresented. And we know that's women and minorities, and so any group that's underrepresented. And so Steve, Lucy, and JQ were a major initial and continue to be a very big supporter of that. And eventually this DEI plus B feedback tool that we have supported ACEC and the Research Institute on.
Joe, from the Institute's perspective, working with all the different initiatives that the Institute's now embarking upon, I mean, really, how did this kind of become a focus of some of the research that you guys have been doing over at the Institute?
So we've been talking about this initiative for a while, Jeff, and earlier this year, Mike Carragher, who became chair of the ACEC Research Institute, told me and Daphne and the other folks at the Research Institute to get moving on this right away. And so we were very happy to receive that direction. And we moved forward with great speed and diligence in producing this diversity roadmap, really in almost record time for a research project of this size. It only took us about 6 months. And so that's kind of where we are today with this project.
And my understanding is, I mean, it's a tool that's ongoing, right? It's something that you have an initial report, but engineering firms are still encouraged to take advantage of the tool to kind of get their own self-assessment about where they are and where they are in relation to the industry on DEIB efforts.
That's right, Jeff. And I know we're going to go into some of the results here, but essentially this is a benchmarking tool and a maturity model. So there's 2 pieces to it. And member firms can participate now through the end of the year And then we will shut off the 2023 data collection. And next year in 2024, we'll start collecting 2024 data. So this is meant to be an initiative that will track not only individual firms' progress over time, but by aggregating the data from each of these firms, we'll see how the industry is progressing over time.
So you mentioned going into some of the details and some of the results, and we're going to pick out a couple of real takeaway items here because we want everybody to go in and read the report. It's available on acecresearchinstitute.org, and we want you to take advantage of the planning and maturity model tool. But let's take a look here. We have some slides that will show that we kind of want to go into, and the first one I thought was really interesting and kind of goes into the, I guess, the first break for takeaway that really surprised me. I guess that, even though a lot of firms have started their own programs, the majority are still aspiring to really mature or really get away from the dock when it comes from the DEIB programming. I'm going to throw it open to the group, to Joe, Chad, and Steve also, to see what do you guys think about this idea that the majority of the industry is still kind of in the early stages of their DEIB journeys?
So, Jeff, from a data perspective, what we found here, as you said, is that the vast majority of firms participating in this study are at that beginning level on this maturity model, and that is the aspiring level. So you will get scored on a scale of 0 to 100 based on the answers you provide. There were about 200 firms that participated in the study so far this year, and you can see almost 80% are in that aspiring category. So from a pure data perspective, that's the type of firm that we have in this study. Very few are at the top level when it comes to the overall assessment.
Now, Steve, as an engineering firm leader yourself, I mean, what's your takeaway from this chart?
Well, I think one of the values of the tool is that as an industry, we've struggled to understand exactly how to benchmark ourselves. There's kind of global data in the marketplace, but there's not data that's specific to the AEC industry to really understand where we stand, what are we doing well, what do we need to work on. The downside to it is we all have said and picture that we've made a lot of progress in this area, but then you look at the percentage that are in the aspiring category, and it just highlights the ramp that we still have in front of us that we need to really catch up with and understand where we're going. At the same time, it's comforting if you're early in the process to realize that you're really not behind, and you can really work with your peer group to really understand areas that you can have impact and really start to change yourself and increase out of the aspiring category into the other categories.
And Chad, what's your big takeaway from this?
Yeah, I was both surprised and not surprised. I think that I was expecting maybe more firms that were further along in their journey to be attracted to something like this. But I think the encouraging thing here is that this is not just a one-time thing. And as I read through the results, to me, it's just, they're very educational. So I think a lot of firms take it the first time, get educated as to what is, and I think it's related to what Steve said. I mean, how do we measure ourselves? I mean, what is good versus bad, and what is something that we need to be working towards? So I think the tool from that standpoint is really good, that it educates. And so it also will encourage firms to each year then take it and move up that scale. And so I guess if you really want to start anywhere, maybe this is where you'd want to start and see then how this moves the industry towards obviously where we're wanting to go, which is the top level.
Absolutely. So let's move on here and let's talk about, really what are we talking about here in terms of universe here, and how many firms actually do have a strategy. And we see that of surveyed, we have 36% do have a DEI&B strategy in place. We have, of course, the second 35% in progress, and then 28 are kind of in, the not sure or the no category, 28 and 2% respectively. Going in, this kind of does correlate with that first chart saying that, majority are aspiring. The good thing is that we do have 36% of firms and closely followed by 35% who either are in process or actually have one established. Taking a look at the industry, is this something that you kind of thought was going to be around that number percentage? I mean, Chad, first with you. I mean, what was your thought when you saw this number come out?
It didn't surprise me, and not to view it pessimistically, but honestly, when I see in progress, I also see a lot of no's in there. I mean, that's the reality of it. It's in progress and no are almost the same thing. It's what we've got to do is move people to the yeses, because these things can be in progress for years. Firms, and this comes from our business consulting side, where we're going into firms and working with them on strategy. Getting alignment around this can be challenging. And so in progress means maybe there's one person trying to champion it and then three people working against it. And that's a problem. Yeah.
Steve, what are your thoughts?
Somewhat along the same lines. I think one, when you get into the data, though, it's looking, at the size firms that you're talking about also. And there is a perception that if you're a small firm, then you're not really going to have a program per se, versus the leader in the firm or the leaders in the firm are really the ones behind it. And you see that in other data within y'all's study. And I do think if you look at that, just because someone doesn't have a program doesn't mean that they're actually working in the area to make a change. And they may say that it's in progress or they don't have it strictly because it's not in writing or something that they can hand off to someone and say, this is our program. And that's indicative of just the demographics of our industry, of diversity of size and diversity of resources that people can have. So the numbers didn't surprise me. The good part is that you do have those, at least a third of the group or a little bit more, does have a plan and is starting to impact and implement the plan.
Joe, with your experience looking at the industry, kind of with the sentiment reports, kind of taking a look at, breaking down the industry by region, by size, all those demographic points, to Steve's point, I think it's well taken that just having a program in place is not enough, because it could just be on paper and to satisfy and check a box on a plan or what have you. Whether you need a program that's actually being put in place and acted upon. Did this number surprise you, given your experience researching the structure of our industry right now?
So I wasn't surprised by the data once I saw it. I really didn't know what to expect, but when I saw it, I thought, okay, this makes a lot of sense to me. I've worked with other industries as well, and they're in similar positions when you look at the data that we have. I think what I want to point out is, building on what Steve mentioned, that there is a really big difference between large firms and small firms, not when it comes to the overall assessment. And that's the interesting thing. When you look at those overall numbers and where firms fall, there's not a difference between small firms and large firms. But when you look at how they're going about DEI&B activities, what you tend to see are that the larger firms have more strategy and are implementing less, whereas smaller firms are less likely to have a strategy, but they actually are doing more DEI&B activities. So that's something that you can find in the report.
The larger the organization, the slower the action, right? You have a lot of strategy, but you don't really implement as quickly. When you have a smaller firm, you tend to be a little bit more nimble and move quickly. So if you have an initiative, you undertake it. It seems to be the that way in organizations in general. Let's move forward here and take a look at really the question of employee engagement, and this comes up a lot when we talk about DEI&B and just really the the need for firms to make sure that the employee base is engaged and also they feel empowered or they feel heard throughout the process here. And what we see is that the breakdown from those surveyed, at least they're doing an annual employee engagement survey or some kind of outreach. Steve, does anything stick out here? I mean, as a firm leader yourself, what's your perspective on employee engagement?
I think you need to come up with a multi-pronged approach to try to engage your staff. I mean, I look back in my career, and it's a 40-year long career, and you had your annual review, and that was about the extent of the engagement that went on. And different people respond to different methodologies that you may have in order to engage them. So I think you need to have reviews. I think you need to have engagement conversations. I think you need to do some surveys to be able to do that. I think you need to be very open with sharing data with your staff and convey why, as a firm, you think certain things are important and you want them to be engaged in that, but also be then willing to explain the rationale behind the why. And so DEI is one of those topics that in some conversations can carry baggage with it. If you're looking at it from a business standpoint, and that's what we're here today to talk about from the business standpoint, it makes perfect sense because it's a matter of making a diverse staff that aligns with your diverse clients and your diverse, your welcoming environment, so you can get people and really have them engaged and be successful within the firm. And so it's not a matter of checking boxes or having certain numbers that you're trying to hit. It's really just how can you make it reflective of the world in which your staff is operating in, and that should be reflected within the makeup of your firm, or at least that's our belief that we need to do that. But then you have to live it and convey it each and every day to be able to respond along those lines as issues come up within the firm.
Chad, from the consultancy side of the world, I mean, are you kind of surprised here? I mean, 15% say never. Semi-annually, 11%, but then you have every other year or longer duration. 20% is a pretty big number for not a lot of contact. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, well, a lot. We don't have time to go through it. We have a whole area of our business that's focused on research and analytics, and we actually have a sizable survey that we run, Best Firms to Work For, which yields 3 million data points a year on employee sentiment. But the reality is everybody is over surveyed nowadays, right? We're getting surveys everywhere we go for every type of service we're consuming. And then these employee engagement surveys are further eroded by companies saying, well, now we want you to fill out the local St. Louis Dispatches or local business journals best places to work in St. Louis or wherever you're located. And so the reality is that employees are over surveyed, more, if you just look at it overall. But the bigger problem, and I think Steve alluded to it, it's like you've got to do something with it, right? It's not just about asking for the results. It's about doing something with the data. So what we recommend to our clients who are interested in moving the needle on employee sentiment, do it once a year, one comprehensive survey, report the results to the employees completely and transparently, and tell them what you're going to do about it. And that's really how you get ROI out of these studies. And I would encourage firms that take this diversity and benchmarking tool through ACEC to share the results and show what they're going to do about it.
And I'll piggyback back on that just a second if I could. And that we actually do that. We take part in Zweig's survey because we've done it year over year. We share the results with all of our leadership and with all of our staff. And then the staff helps identify what the 3 or 4 or 5 topics that we're going to focus on over the next year to where we see the most pinch point within our experience with our staff. And I see this survey being very much along the same lines. We can use this as a data point within our company's history. We can focus on the areas that we want to collectively focus on. And then we can compare what our results are in the following year as to whether or not we're successful in addressing those issues or not, and what our next steps may be.
Joe, to Chad's point about employees feeling over-surveyed, and as a researcher yourself, I mean, what are some of the other tactics that could be successful in lieu of a survey, or doing, the idea of doing what you said, you do one survey a year, but then you follow up after that. What are some other action items you think that firms could undertake to do some soundings on their employee base?
Chad's right. People are over-surveyed in every aspect of their life, and people go to work and then they're surveyed again. So that is something that is a challenge that we face as just as in general in the United States. But it's not a bad thing though to continue to ask your employees on important matters. And so I would agree with Chad that, first of all, you don't want to over-survey your employees, and this is probably at best once a year for most companies. But you can engage your employees in other feedback mechanisms. You can have focus groups from time to time. You can have employee suggestion boxes. There's a lot of different ways that you can engage your employees to get feedback and to assess where you are in terms of your diversity. So, you don't want to over rely on surveys, that's for sure.
Let's move forward here and see what we have next. So now this is an interesting thing, because this also takes consideration of the marketplace right now. So we have 49% of firms agree that they include DEIB strategies when they pursue work. So 37% agree, 12% strongly agree. So it looks like agree and neutral pretty much lead the race here. But disagree and strongly disagree are kind of are relatively low numbers. From a, I guess, marketplace right now, the fact that you have more public clients who want to ensure that the project teams represent the communities that they're going to be serving, that you have certain requirements on what is the breakdown of the firm that is going to be demographically is going to be working on certain projects in the built environment, and then the general trend of making sure that you're competitive with your peers. Chad, I mean, what are you seeing in the marketplace right now with DEIB and the firms that are successful in navigating this so that they are as successful as possible going after public and private work?
Well, you said it. I mean, it's really about business development strategies that reflect the audience that they are pursuing, whether that's the selection committee, the community, et cetera. I think is very important. I think that, and I'm not sure that the detail or what additional context is available for firms to provide around this, but I would certainly be curious of how much of it's required. And this is where I'd love to get Steve's input, because their work across Texas, and Texas has got some real complex rules around project teams and et cetera. And I wonder how much of this is required versus this is something we really want to do versus it's a business development good practice strategy.
Yeah, Steve, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I had the exact same comment because I looked at the data, and one interesting part to me was also the percentage of participants in the study that were located in the South. And so you do see differences regionally around the United States. In Texas, we have an extremely robust MWBE program at the state level and at all the large metropolitan areas. And so if you're in the public sector within Texas, you have definite requirements and goals related to the ownership of the companies, not as much as far as the makeup of the staff. But you see what Chad mentioned is what's required versus what you may be doing because you just see it as good business practice, or also what the culture of your firm is. And the study doesn't really break it down along those lines completely, but it'd be interesting to kind of look at that to get some viewpoint of it. But the numbers don't necessarily surprise me. Just in talking to peers and where they look at, if you are in the public sector primarily, you're doing this somewhat by default, whether or not it's required or not, because you're also trying to connect with your end user. And you're going to see lots of diversity within the user group and also within the ownership group, typically, potentially more so than you're going to see within the consultant group.
So, Joe, I mean, how does this match up with some of the data that you've been looking at from a regional breakdown? When you'll see firms looking at different market sectors and see where growth is, how does this correlate with any of the data that you've been looking at?
Yeah, so it's really interesting in this study that we saw here and there a few regional differences. You'll particularly see that on the next slide that you're going to share. But overall, we didn't see a lot of regional differences in this study. There were many more differences when you look at firm size. And that seems to be what is typical in the studies that we conduct with ACEC member firms, is that we'll typically see that there are more differences by firm size than there are geographically. Now, that is not to say, as Steve pointed out, that there are certainly places, areas, if you're primarily focused in the public sector, you're going to be focusing more on diversity than in other areas. But that it doesn't come out in a regional look at the firms when we look at it in the 4 census regions of the U.S.
Well, to your point, let's move ahead here and take a look, because we're looking at firms are more likely to be asked to articulate commitment to DEIB when pursuing public work, and this kind of goes back to to that point of the requirements now a lot in public agencies and certain markets. So really, we're looking at here. That's interesting that sometimes asked, private 31, public 35, often asked. There you go. You see that breakdown: 26%. Public and only 11% private, and then always asked, practically zero on private, but public 6%. This really kind of does go back to what we were talking about. It's just that you see that drive by, especially public sector clients, that they want to have project teams that are diverse. Leave this open to comment. Let's start with Chad. I mean, this kind of does validate what you said before. Is there anything else that you want to hit on when looking at these numbers?
Yeah, it certainly does help provide some context to that previous slide, and not surprising, private much less. If you go down to never asked, private, that's a quarter, of those that responded. So that this certainly does not surprise me. And so it just brings up to me the point of how much of this is like we elect to do this versus we're forced to do it.
Steve, any additional takeaways?
I think that, but I think firms should look at this and also look at there's business development, and as it relates to obtaining work, there's also business development related to obtaining staff. And if you start to look at your perception in the marketplace as to how you present yourself to pursue work, also becomes your perception to your potential future employees or other people you're trying to attract. To ignore it, I think, starts to have an adverse impact on your business as a whole as to where you're going to go. And so I think we categorize business development strictly related to work procurement, but I think we really need to look at it as public relations and all those things related to how you're presenting your company. And just because somebody doesn't ask you doesn't mean that you don't want to present your culture and what you stand for within how you present your company. So I guess I'd do it more as a challenge to those who said they never do it, as to, is that the best business decision for you to make as to how you present and develop your company.
That's a really good point. That is an important piece of marketing of how excellent you want to present your firm, and in strategic planning. When you're looking at a roadmap 5-10 years into the future, how do you want your firm to be positioned in the marketplace? Joe, I mean, this is a good example of the importance of getting data and being able to actually benchmark here. What are you hoping to do in the next iteration here? I mean, this kind of goes into the idea of everybody out there go up and take advantage of this benchmarking tool so we can gather more information. What are you hoping to see after a couple of iterations of this benchmarking tool when you start seeing this? Do you think that the numbers are going to fairly stay the same, or do you think they might shift a little bit over time?
I think that's a really good question. It's a bit of an unknown at the moment. We know that firms can be slow to change, but that's why we are going to conduct this study on a year-over-year basis. What I think is helpful is that Steve mentioned that you need to look at different aspects of your business. And this benchmarking tool does that. We have different sections on workforce, workplace, your business development, community relations, as well as demographic information that we're collecting on your own employee base. So there's a lot of different aspects to the diversity roadmap that we really haven't talked about here today, and that is really important for firms to read the full report. And then again, as I said, to your point, we hope to see more firms participating in this study year over year so that we'll get an even broader and more detailed picture of the industry. And of course, we're hoping to see progress. I can't tell you whether we'll see progress after 1 year or 2 years, but the idea is that by elevating this information and providing this information, that we will get people to act upon it. So we provide a checklist within the report. So if you are a firm and you want to actually know what you should be doing, participate in the study, and the individualized report that you get will show you exactly what you need to do to move the needle.
It's a very, very, very good point. And then let's take a look at this. This is I think the generational shock question. It's millennials represent the largest proportion of the workforce, 42%. The boomer generations, 13%. Gen X, my good old generation, 27%. 42% millennials, and of course Gen Z is 17%. They're of course rapidly gaining traction. I think people still consider millennials to be people in their 20s, but in fact they're still in their 40s and maybe early 40s. This demographic breakdown is kind of a signal that companies need to change to kind of meet the needs of a new generation of worker. Steve, as a firm leader, looking at this number, 42% millennial, what does it mean to you from the cultural aspect of your firm and kind of how you address workplace matters, address employee needs, the shifting, objectives of your employees? How does this kind of translate into your day to day?
Well, I'm a boomer, so I'm toward the end here. So the first thing to do is from my own personal viewpoint was to just admit I don't know what they want. The only way I'm going to really know what our staff needs and wants is to engage them in some way to have that conversation so you can gain that from them. And then you can't be dismissive in that conversation because their viewpoint is the reality of the world from their standpoint. And if you want to engage and keep that staff going, then you need to engage them on their own terms and be able to really listen to what they do and what policies can you do in order to make that the best work environment for them to want to stay in our industry and then want to stay with your firm. And if those are your end results and you're having honest conversations with them, then I think you can get a lot out of that as to what you're going to do. And what we've found is that in almost every case, what they are looking for also makes good business sense to be able to provide. And it actually made good business sense back when I was starting my career. It just wasn't what people looked at the time. But things like parental leave and things like that, those have huge paybacks for keeping your staff that you've trained and spent all this money on to keep engaged within your company. That why would you not support that versus having to get this churn of additional staff that you have to try to find to get, especially in today's environment. So I think you just have to recognize that it is going to be diverse. There's power in that diversity and different viewpoints, and that even in mentor-protege situations, the mentor can become the protege in a lot of conversations that you have.
Well put, Chad. What are you seeing that from your work in on the consultancy side? How are firms kind of changing to meet the need of a relatively younger demographic?
Well, what Steve said is a perfect segue as we kind of zoom out and wrap this up. I mean, the reality is that it is a business issue. It's a business performance issue, and firm leaders have got to get clear as to what DEI means to them. If you look at, I mean, we're looking at this chart, the majority of those in the workforce in their firm leaders who are likely boomers, maybe in Gen X as well, but the majority of their people were now born before or after 1981, born after 1981. So the reality is that you've really got to understand what this means. And just to, I mean, not to go off on a little tangent here, but firm leaders have got to understand the business issue of DEI, right? And the reality is that term DEI has been hijacked politically. But if firm leaders want to understand what this really is, they need to go to page 1 of the report and read the Research Institute's definitions of what diversity is, equity, inclusion. If you read that, and belonging, if you read those describe a good corporate culture, period. That's what they describe. A good corporate culture, which every firm leader wants, a good corporate culture. They want, in a climate where recruiting and retention is their greatest challenge, they want a good corporate culture. And those that are in the millennials and Generation Z, they value purpose and meaning beyond all other aspects of their business. And so this is the path to do it. I mean, this is what drives business performance now and in the future. I think it's just that clear.
We really kind of end where we started right there. I mean, really just talking about getting that idea of a strong corporate culture and using this as a tool to help guide engineering firms to navigate the way to stay current with the market demands, stay current with the demands of their client base, but then also to make sure that they are effectively retaining and attracting the next generation of engineers who, of course, are in very, very short supply to their firms and keeping them there and getting the next generation of leadership in place. So really want to encourage everyone to go up onto the ACEC Research Institute website to download your copy of the Diversity Roadmap. It is free to download and also to take advantage of the benchmark tool, which is open right now. And so we can start collecting even more data and we can start getting a good year-over-year review of exactly where the industry is. Chad, Steve, and Joe, I really appreciate all of your time today to go over some of the high points here. And thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we can have you back on to talk about the 2024 results as well. But thank you for your time.
Thank you. And thank you for everything you're doing.
Well, I appreciate it. And again, this has been Engineering Influence, a podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies, and we'll see you next time.